Skies of Fire. Chapter 5. Wings at Last. Thetford greeted us with pale December sunshine and the distant drone of aircraft engines, a sound that quickened pulses among even the most fatigued travelers. The train station buzzed with military activity as various groups of cadets arrived and departed, moving through the pipeline that transformed civilians into combat aviators. "That's the sound of actual flying," Bird remarked, cocking his head toward the engine noise. "Not lectures about flying, not preparing to fly. Actually getting off the ground." His enthusiasm was contagious, drawing tired smiles from the rest of us as we collected our gear and formed into orderly lines outside the station. Transport trucks waited nearby, their canvas covers flapping in the brisk winter wind. "Cadets for the Royal Flying Corps training field?" a British lieutenant inquired, approaching our group with a clipboard in hand. Springs stepped forward. "Yes, sir. American detachment, transferred from Grantham." The lieutenant checked his list. "Ah, yes. The Italian volunteers who ended up in England." His tone was neutral, but something in his expression suggested he found our circuitous journey amusing. "You'll be in trucks 3 and 4. Your quarters are prepared at the field." We loaded our belongings and ourselves, then endured another jolting ride through unfamiliar terrain. Thetford proved to be a modest market town, surrounded by flat, open countryside, ideal for an airfield, though decidedly bleak in December's fading light. The airfield appeared suddenly, a sprawling complex of hangars, barracks, administrative buildings, and workshops, with a vast expanse of flattened grass serving as runways. Aircraft dotted the field, some in flight, others being serviced on the ground, still more lined up near hangars awaiting their turn in the air. The sight stirred something profound, a recognition that after months of preparation, we had finally reached the place where theory would become practice. Our truck stopped outside a cluster of wooden barracks, similar to those at Harrowby Camp, but newer, apparently constructed specifically for the expanding training program. We disembarked into the characteristic organized chaos of military reassignment. Names checked against lists, quarters assigned, equipment distributed, schedules explained in rapid-fire instructions that left little time for questions. "Marshall, Callahan, Merrick, Stokes," a harried sergeant read from his clipboard. "Hut 7, bunks 12 through 15. Next 4. We collected our bedding and personal gear, then made our way to the indicated barracks, finding it already half occupied by British cadets at various stages of flight training. They greeted us with casual nods or brief waves, too focused on their own concerns to show much curiosity about new arrivals. "Different atmosphere here," Cal observed quietly as we claimed our assigned bunks. Springs nodded agreement. Everyone's preoccupied with flying, or worried about not flying well enough. The observation proved accurate as we settled in and began to absorb the rhythms of Thetford. Unlike Oxford with its academic formality, or Grantham with its military regimentation, the flight training field operated on its own distinctive pattern, one dominated by weather, aircraft availability, and the requirements of progressive instruction. Schedules changed daily, sometimes hourly, as conditions evolved. "It's a miracle anything gets accomplished," remarked a British cadet named Wilson, who had already been at Thetford for 3 weeks. "Half the time they're grounding flights for weather. The other half they're rushing everyone into the air because there's a clear patch. No rhyme or reason to it." Despite this apparent disorder, we quickly discovered the underlying structure. Cadets were divided into small groups assigned to specific instructors, progressing through a carefully sequenced curriculum that moved from basic familiarization to solo flight. Aircraft were allocated according to training needs, with the more advanced students receiving priority during optimal flying conditions. Our first morning began with a general orientation in one of the larger hangars, where a collection of training aircraft stood in various states of assembly. The smell of dope, oil, and fresh-cut timber permeated the space, the distinctive aroma of early aviation that would become as familiar as the scent of my own skin in the weeks ahead. "Gentlemen," began our chief instructor, a Captain Harrison who looked absurdly young for his responsibility, "welcome to Thetford. By now, you've completed ground school, weapons training, and physical preparation. All of that is foundation. What we do here is the structure that will keep you alive, or not, when you reach the front." He gestured to the nearest aircraft, a boxy biplane with tandem cockpits. "This is the Maurice Farman Shorthorn, affectionately known as the Rumpety. It is stable, forgiving, and flies like a brick with pretensions. You will begin your training in dual control versions under instructor guidance. Once you demonstrate basic competence, you will progress to solo flights in the same aircraft." Captain Harrison moved to the next machine, a somewhat sleeker design. After mastering the Rumpety, those who show sufficient aptitude will advance to the Avro 504, which more closely approximates the characteristics of front-line scout aircraft. Final training will involve acrobatics, formation flying, and combat maneuvers. He paused, scanning our faces with the evaluative gaze of a man who had seen many cadets enter this hangar filled with optimism, not all of whom had emerged from training with that optimism, or their lives, intact. I must emphasize that flying is inherently dangerous even without enemy action. These machines are primitive, temperamental, and unforgiving of significant error. You will be pushed to your limits, but never beyond what is necessary for survival at the front. Questions? There were many, of course, but few that could be meaningfully answered before we had experienced flight ourselves. After addressing the most pressing inquiries about schedules and procedures, Captain Harrison dismissed us to our assigned instructors. Cal, Springs, and I found ourselves in a group with 4 other Americans and 2 Australians, under the guidance of a lieutenant named Pembroke. He was older than most instructors, perhaps 30, with a permanently weathered complexion and the calm demeanor of someone who had survived enough close calls to respect danger without fearing it. "Right," he said after introductions. "We'll start with ground instruction. Before you touch a control, you need to understand exactly what each movement does to the aircraft and why." The morning passed in detailed explanation of the control systems, stick and rudder, throttle and magneto switches, instrument panel with its minimal gauges. We studied diagrams of airflow patterns, learned the principles of 3-axis movement, and absorbed the counterintuitive fact that pulling back on the stick made the aircraft climb, while pushing forward initiated descent. After lunch, Pembroke led us to one of the Farman Shorthorns, positioned at the edge of the airfield. Up close, the training aircraft revealed both its sturdiness and its primitive nature. Wire-braced wings covered in doped fabric, an exposed wooden framework, cockpits open to the elements with minimal instrumentation. "Looks like something the Wright brothers would have rejected as too basic," Bird muttered earning a sharp glance from Pembroke. "It is basic, Mr. Bird," the instructor acknowledged. "Deliberately so. You learn fundamentals on a forgiving platform before advancing to machines that might kill you for small mistakes. The Rumpety gives you time to recognize and correct errors that would be fatal in a Camel or an SE-5. We spent the afternoon practicing cockpit procedures, the precise sequence of checks before startup, the correct hand positions on controls, the critical actions required in various emergency scenarios. By day's end, none of us had left the ground, but all had developed a more profound appreciation for the complexity underlying what had seemed, from a distance, like the straightforward act of flying. "When do we actually get into the air?" Curtis asked as we walked back to the barracks, the winter daylight already fading, though it was barely 4 o'clock. "Pembroke says tomorrow, if the weather holds," Springs replied. "Dual instruction first, of course." "Of course," Curtis echoed, unable to hide his disappointment at the gradual pace. That evening, the barracks buzzed with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Those who had already experienced flight shared stories, some encouraging, others deliberately terrifying, in the tradition of veterans hazing newcomers. The British cadets, further along in their training, offered practical advice mingled with cautionary tales. "Keep your head on a swivel," advised Wilson, now positioned as a mentor by virtue of his 3 extra weeks of experience. "The sky looks empty until suddenly it isn't, and by then it's often too late." "What about the aircraft itself?" Cal asked. "Any particular quirks we should know?" Wilson considered this. "The Rumpety wallows in a crosswind, feels like you're steering a boat through mud, and the landing gear's fragile if you come down hard. Otherwise, it's stable as a table. Makes a terrible racket, though." Sleep came fitfully that night, my dreams filled with images of flight drawn more from imagination than experience. Morning arrived with a thin winter sun, barely penetrating low clouds. Conditions that introduced us to another reality of flight training. Weather delays. "Ceiling too low," Pembroke announced at breakfast. "Visibility insufficient for primary instruction. We'll continue ground training until conditions improve." The day passed in a combination of classroom work and practical maintenance instruction. We studied aircraft engines, learned basic repair procedures, practiced rigging adjustments under the supervision of ground crew members. Useful knowledge, certainly, but a poor substitute for the flight we had all anticipated. "This is England in December," Wilson reminded us when frustration became evident. "Get used to waiting for weather. Some weeks you'll barely see the sky, much less fly in it." His prediction proved painfully accurate. 3 days passed before conditions improved sufficiently for training flights to resume. During that time, we absorbed volumes of technical information, practiced emergency procedures in stationary aircraft, and developed the particular kind of patience unique to aviators: the ability to remain alert and prepared despite repeated postponements. When flying weather finally arrived, it came with crystalline clarity. A cold, bright morning, with minimal wind and unlimited visibility. The airfield erupted into activity before dawn. Ground crews preparing aircraft, instructors reviewing flight plans, cadets reporting for assignments with barely contained excitement. "Marshal," Pembroke called, consulting his clipboard. "You're first up this morning." My heart leaped into my throat as I followed him to a waiting Farman, its engine already ticking over with a syncopated rhythm that seemed to match my accelerated pulse. A mechanic helped me into the rear cockpit, the student position, and supervised as I strapped myself in with the simple safety belt. "Remember your procedures," Pembroke instructed, taking his place in the front cockpit. "I'll handle the takeoff and initial climb. Once we're at altitude, I'll have you follow through on the controls to feel the aircraft's responses. No independent movement unless I specifically instruct you. Understood?" "Yes, sir," I confirmed, my voice steadier than I felt. The mechanic swung the propeller through several more revolutions, then stepped clear with a thumbs up. Pembroke advanced the throttle, and the engine's rhythm transformed from idle tick to insistent roar. The aircraft shuddered, straining against the chocks until they were removed, then began moving forward with increasing speed. The sensation of that first takeoff was unlike anything in previous experience. One instant we were bound by gravity. The next, we were free of it, climbing away from the diminishing airfield with a stomach-dropping sensation of transition. At approximately 500 feet, Pembroke leveled off and reduced power slightly. He turned his head, voice barely audible above the engine and wind. "Put your hands and feet lightly on the controls. Feel what I'm doing, but don't resist." I complied, sensing through the stick and rudder pedals how the aircraft responded to his inputs. Each movement created an immediate effect. The nose rising or falling, the wings banking left or right, the tail swinging in coordinated turns. The responsiveness was both exhilarating and intimidating, the machine seeming alive beneath my tentative touch. "I'm going to let you try straight and level flight," Pembroke shouted after several minutes of demonstration. "Just small corrections, nothing abrupt." He released the controls, and suddenly the Farman was mine to command. For a breathless moment, the aircraft wobbled as I overcorrected, then settled as I found the delicate balance required. We flew straight and level for perhaps 2 minutes, an eternity of focused concentration, before Pembroke reclaimed control for a gentle turn. "Not bad," he called, executing a wide circuit that brought us back toward the airfield. "Now watch the landing approach carefully. Notice how I reduce power gradually, how the attitude changes for descent, how I level off just before touchdown." The landing sequence unfolded with methodical precision. A controlled descent, a final approach aligned with the field's longest dimension, a gentle flare as the ground approached, then contact with Earth once more. The transition from flight to ground roll, managed with the same careful attention as the takeoff had been. As we taxied back to the starting point, I became aware of a wide grin stretching my face. Something fundamental had changed in those 20 minutes aloft. I had entered a realm previously experienced only through imagination and others' accounts. Now I possessed direct knowledge, however preliminary, of what it meant to fly. Cal was next in the rotation, followed by Springs, Curtis, and the others in our group. Each returned from that first flight with the same transformed expression, part exhilaration, part serious realization of responsibility, part simple awe at having temporarily escaped Earth's confines. "Well?" Cal asked when we regrouped after the morning's flights. "Incredible," I replied, knowing the word was wholly inadequate. Springs nodded agreement. "Makes everything else, all the preparation, all the waiting, worth it. Our training established its rhythm, flying when weather permitted, ground instruction when it didn't, each day building on the previous one's lessons. We progressed from following through on controls to actually handling the aircraft under supervision. from basic straight and level flight to turns, climbs, and descents, from calm weather operations to managing in wind and reduced visibility. "You're making adequate progress," Pembroke informed me after my 8th dual instruction flight. "Still tense on the controls sometimes, still anticipating corrections before they're needed. But the fundamental understanding is there." Similar assessments were offered to most in our group, though with individual variations. Cal received praise for his natural smoothness on the controls, while Springs was commended for his analytical approach to flight problems. Bird struggled initially with coordination, while Curtis demonstrated an intuitive grasp of three-dimensional maneuvering. December days grew shorter, limiting flying hours and intensifying the pressure to maximize good weather. Christmas approached with little acknowledgement in our training regimen, beyond slightly improved meals and permission for religious services. The war didn't pause for holidays, we were reminded, and neither would our preparation for it. Days of dual instruction accumulated, 10, 12, 15 flights for each of us, gradually increasing in complexity and student responsibility. The Farman Shorthorn became familiar territory, its peculiarities known and compensated for, its controls extensions of our own bodies rather than foreign mechanisms. "When do you think we'll solo?" Cal asked one evening as we played cards in the barracks, a pastime that had become our primary entertainment during weather delays. Wilson, passing by, overheard the question. When your instructor decides you're less likely to kill yourself than waste a perfectly good aircraft by keeping you grounded. His deadpan delivery drew laughs, but the underlying truth was apparent. Solo flight represented a threshold not just of skill, but of trust. Our instructors literally betting our lives and valuable equipment on their assessment of our readiness. For me, that moment arrived on a clear January morning, 3 weeks into training. Pembroke and I had completed a routine instruction flight, practicing landings in crosswind conditions. After the 6th touchdown and rollout, he directed me to taxi back to our starting position, rather than taking off again. "Cut the engine," he instructed once we were properly positioned. I complied, the sudden silence almost as startling as the engine's roar had been during my first flight. Pembroke climbed out of the front cockpit, then turned to face me with an evaluative expression. "You're ready for solo," he stated without preamble. "Take her once around the circuit. Takeoff, left-hand pattern, landing. Nothing fancy. Just demonstrate you can get up and down in one piece." My heart hammered against my ribs as I absorbed his words. Solo. The moment every cadet simultaneously craved and dreaded. The true beginning of life as a pilot rather than merely a student. "Yes, sir," I managed, my throat suddenly dry. Pembroke nodded once, then stepped clear of the aircraft. "Remember your training. The Rumpety wants to fly. Let it—" A mechanic approached to help with the engine start, then retreated with Pembroke to a safe distance. I was alone in the aircraft, truly alone for the first time, without the reassuring presence of an instructor ready to correct mistakes or take over an emergency. The checklist sequence flowed automatically, each action performed with the deliberate care of someone acutely aware that his life now depended entirely on his own decisions. Engine start, control check, final survey of instruments and surroundings. Everything in order, no reason to delay. I advanced the throttle, feeling the Farman strain forward, then roll into its takeoff run with what seemed greater acceleration than usual, the absence of an instructor's weight making a noticeable difference. The tail lifted, The bumpy ground rush transitioned to smooth air, and suddenly I was climbing away from Earth, solely responsible for the machine carrying me skyward. The circuit unfolded as practiced dozens of times. A climbing left turn after gaining sufficient altitude, leveling off at approximately 1,000 feet, continuing the left-hand pattern that would bring me back toward the airfield from the opposite direction. Each element was familiar, yet transformed by the absence of supervision. Each decision mine alone to make. As I turned final for landing, I forced myself to breathe deeply, to avoid the tension that could translate into over-control. The approach angle looked good, airspeed stable, alignment with the landing area correct. I reduced power gradually, maintaining the gentle descent that would bring me to the proper landing attitude. The ground rose to meet the aircraft, or the aircraft descended to meet the ground, the distinction blurring in these critical moments. I flared slightly too early, recognized the error, adjusted with a touch more power, then settled onto the field with a bump that was less than elegant, but far from disastrous. As I taxied back to the starting point, I became aware of a lightness that had nothing to do with the aircraft's handling. A sensation of having crossed a threshold that could never be uncrossed, of having proven something essential not just to my instructors but to myself. I had flown alone and returned safely. Pembroke was waiting as I shut down the engine and climbed from the cockpit on legs that felt unexpectedly unsteady. His expression remained professionally neutral, but a hint of satisfaction showed around his eyes. "Acceptable," he pronounced, which from him constituted high praise. "Early flare on landing, but you recognized and corrected appropriately. 2 more solo circuits this afternoon if weather holds." Only after he walked away did I allow myself the grin that had been building inside. I had done it. I had truly flown. The others in our group reached this milestone at their own pace. Cal the same day as me, Springs the following morning, Curtis and Bird within the next week. Each experienced that same transformation, that shift from student to pilot, that altered not just skills, but identity. "Different now, isn't it?" Springs observed as we watched Bird complete his first solo landing. All of us gathered at the field's edge in the tradition of pilots supporting each other through this critical transition. I nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. There was a clarity that came with solo flight, a directness of experience unfiltered by instruction or supervision. The aircraft became truly yours in those moments alone. Its responses and behaviors intimate knowledge rather than academic understanding. Our training accelerated after the solo threshold. Additional hours building confidence and competence. Instruction in more complex maneuvers. Eventual transition to the Avro 504 for those showing sufficient aptitude. This aircraft, faster, more responsive, closer in handling to frontline scouts, presented new challenges but also new exhilaration. The Avro won't forgive mistakes like the Rumpety, Pembroke warned during my transition training. It demands precision and respect. Give it both, and it will teach you what you need to know for combat flying. January gave way to February, bringing marginally improved weather, but intensified training demands. We flew whenever conditions permitted, sometimes twice or 3 times daily, accumulating the hours and experience that would qualify us for wings. Between flights, we studied maps and meteorology, aircraft recognition and emergency procedures, the 1,000 details that separated survivors from statistics in the air war. Not everyone progressed smoothly. A British cadet crashed on landing, breaking both legs but surprisingly little else. An Australian washed out of training after demonstrating dangerous tendencies in solo flight. A fellow American developed what the British called wind-up, a nervous condition that manifested as hesitation and poor decision-making in the air. "He'll never make a combat pilot," Wilson observed clinically, as the affected cadet was reassigned to ground duties. Better to discover it here than over German lines. The observation carried no criticism, merely acknowledgement of the unforgiving reality we all faced. Some had the temperament for aerial combat, others didn't, and no amount of desire could change that fundamental truth. February brought the final phases of our training: formation flying, aerial photography, rudimentary combat maneuvers. We learned to operate in pairs and larger groups, to maintain precise positions relative to other aircraft, to compensate for the disturbances caused by proximity in flight. In combat, your formation is your protection, emphasized a new instructor, a captain recently returned from the front with an empty sleeve pinned to his tunic. Lone aircraft are prime targets. Stay together, watch each other's blind spots, coordinate your attacks and retreats. That's how you survive long enough to become effective. His practical experience lent weight to theoretical instruction, transforming abstract concepts into vital knowledge. We absorbed everything he offered, aware that we were receiving wisdom purchased at high personal cost. As February waned, the moment we had all been working toward approached: the final qualifying flights that would earn us wings, the official transition from cadets to pilots. The tests were comprehensive: precision flying, emergency handling, navigation exercises, simulated combat scenarios. Each element had to be demonstrated to exacting standards, each skill proven under the critical eye of senior instructors. "Don't overthink it," Pembroke advised our group the evening before these culminating flights. "You know how to fly these aircraft. Just demonstrate that knowledge clearly and consistently. That's all there is to it." His understated approach had become familiar and reassuring over our weeks together, a calm center in the often chaotic environment of the training field. Whatever nerves we felt about the upcoming evaluation, his confidence in our preparation helped steady them. My own qualifying flights unfolded with unexpected smoothness. Not perfect, certainly, but competent and controlled. I executed the required maneuvers within acceptable parameters, demonstrated proper responses to simulated emergencies, completed the navigation exercise with only minor course corrections. When I landed after the final test, Pembroke was waiting with the same professionally neutral expression he always maintained. "Satisfactory," he pronounced, which from him constituted the highest accolade. "Report to administration tomorrow at 0900 for processing." The administrative formalities followed with military precision. Paperwork completed, photographs taken for records, official entries made in logbooks that would follow us throughout our service. And finally, the moment itself, the presentation of wings, the small metal insignia that transformed us from trainees to qualified military pilots. Colonel Harrington, the field's commanding officer, presided over the ceremony in one of the larger hangars. Aircraft parked to either side, like silent witnesses to our achievement. He spoke briefly about responsibility, about the trust being placed in us, about the challenges awaiting at the front. Then he presented the wings individually. calling each cadet forward for the formal pinning. "Lieutenant Marshal," he announced when my turn came. I stepped forward, standing at attention as he pinned the wings to my tunic, the physical symbol of transformation complete. The metal felt cool against my chest, its weight negligible, yet somehow profound, like a key unlocking a door I had been working toward since leaving America months earlier. "Congratulations, Lieutenant," the colonel said, offering a handshake that formally acknowledged my new status. "Fly well, fight bravely, return safely." "Thank you, sir," I replied, the words seeming inadequate for the moment's significance. Cal, Springs, Curtis, Bird, and others from our original group received their wings in turn, each experiencing that same transition from cadet to pilot, each carrying the mix of pride and solemn awareness that accompanied the achievement. We had entered Thetford as students. We departed as aviators, qualified to operate military aircraft in the most demanding conditions imaginable. Our final evening at the training field was marked by the traditional celebration, a dinner in the officers' mess, where newly winged pilots were welcomed as equals by instructors who had, until that day, maintained professional distance. The atmosphere combined genuine congratulation with sober recognition of what awaited us at the front. "I won't pretend it will be easy," Pembroke told me when we spoke privately later in the evening. "The Hun has excellent pilots and increasingly better aircraft. But you've been well trained, and you have good instincts. Trust both when you're up there." Morning brought the expected orders. One final transfer, this time to London Colney for advanced training on frontline aircraft. There we would learn to fly the machines we would take into combat: Camels, Dolphins, SE-5s, and absorb the final elements of aerial warfare before being posted to operational squadrons. As we boarded the train that would carry us from Thetford, I found myself reflecting on the journey thus far, from civilian to soldier, from ground-bound to airborne, from theory to practice. Each phase had changed us in ways both obvious and subtle, preparing us for the ultimate test that awaited above enemy lines. Cal nudged my arm, drawing me from reflection. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" I considered the question, then offered the simplest true answer: the distance between earning wings and deserving them. He nodded understanding. Springs, seated across from us, looked up from the book he'd been reading. "That distance," he observed, "is measured in combat. We'll find out soon enough if we can cross it."
Enjoying the story? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a new chapter. Episodes drop every week. Be part of the adventure. And if you're hooked, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your support helps keep the story alive.